going to mute everybody, and then I'm going to unmute you, Andy. So just give me a second here. Okay, you may have to unmute yourself, Andy. I've sent you
okay
to do so. Okay, fantastic. Well, I think that I'm trying to manage the waiting room here. Okay. I think most of you probably know Andy. He's a member of our congregation, but it is also the I'm not sure I'm getting this exactly right. Co-owner of Book and Puppet along with Rebecca, who's also a member. And he has an independent bookstore in Easton. And I was in there a couple of weeks ago and thought, why don't we have him talk about doing what he does here in the Lehigh Valley and letting people know how things are going during COVID, and also to talk to us a little bit about the Easton Book Festival, which he's starting. So with that introduction, Andy, go ahead and take it away.
Hi everybody, great to see you all. We have not attended these Zoom meetings, and it's amazing that everybody's here. It's quite impressive. As Steve mentioned, we have been running a book festival ourselves in the last 2 weeks on Zoom, and we've now had 35 events in the last 2 weeks, and we have about another 30 to go before the festival ends in the middle of November. And that is a big part of the story of how our bookstore has been functioning over the last couple of months, is that it's all been, or a significant amount of it has been dependent on online activity. Now, I've had websites for years, but the amount of business that we've been doing online has never been as much. And I'm very glad that we have a website for Book and Puppet Company that can sell anything that's in print and has full access to all the big databases. So people that come to Book and Puppet Company they can order whatever they want. Just like you can on Amazon. We can compete with Amazon that way. People can make special orders. It doesn't have to be in our store, and we can get books in a couple of days. It's just that not many people had been using that service that we had accessible because they saw us as their local independent bookstore that you would come and visit in person. But one of the things I think is really true about our clientele and the clienteles of many independent bookstores around the country is that they want to support us. They actually, people who shop at a local independent bookstore are doing so consciously. That's something that has emerged in the last 10 years. People understand, if they love independent bookstores, that they have to make a choice and decide to shop at the independent bookstore in order to support it and ensure that there will be an independent bookstore in their community. And that's what's been happening to us since we opened 3 years ago. We have a customer base who has been making an effort to shop at our store and support us. And so when we got shut down, along with lots of small businesses, all of the small businesses in March, we saw a flood of online orders. And that consciousness that it was important to decide to support your local businesses is something that I think has been happening all over the country. And it's gone in waves. We had much more online business in March through May. And then it kind of, it's dropped somewhat. But during that period, I was we had curbside pickup, and also I was delivering. So I was driving all over Easton and also into Bethlehem. A couple times a week, I would put 6 or 8 or 10 orders that I had managed to assemble into my car, and I would drive around, and I got to see the homes of lots of customers, which was very interesting. And I just moved to Easton. Rebecca and I just moved to Easton in January of 2017. So I'm not that familiar with the area, or I hadn't been that familiar with the area. But now I have driven to dozens and dozens of neighborhoods, and my customers live all over the place. There's all kinds of different niches and little nooks and crannies in this area. And people live in so many different kinds of places. So it's been fascinating. And some of the people that have been placing orders and to whom I've been delivering, their children at home, and the children come running out of the house when I pull up. So it's very exciting. People like to have their books delivered to them by their local book dealer. There have been, business dropped by half, and it's absolutely been a problem for us. But there's also been some positive things, such as getting the chance to see where my customers live, and becoming more significant in their lives, and also getting to do this book festival online has the virtue that we are recording every single session that we do. So we have this incredible archive of the book festival, and you can see it online. If you go to eastonbookfestival.com, or if you go to the Facebook page of the Easton Book Festival, you can see right there on the front page, there's links to several dozen programs that have happened over the last 2 weeks. So it's been a challenge, but there's also been some positive things that have come out of it. I wanted to talk for a second about the generalized negative prognosis that independent bookselling has had kind of hovering about it for the last couple of decades. People have been saying independent bookstores are dead or are doomed for quite a while now. And I think that this is another such moment. I think that a lot of the media is reporting in this kind of anxious way about independent bookselling as a whole. And of course, if it bleeds, it leads. And that means that there's bad news about independent bookselling. The most recent big bad news story is The Strand has put out a call for help. They said their sales are down over 70%. And there's been quite lively reporting about The Strand. And just a week or two before that, the McNally Jackson stores in New York put out a call that they were in trouble. And in fact, all over the country, independent bookstores have been setting up GoFundMe sites. And so this kind of a moment recalls to all of us what happened to independent bookstores 10 years ago, what happened to independent bookstores 20 years ago, what happened, and then our memories start to fade. Although if you have been paying attention to book history, or you're in the field and you studied it, then you know that this is always happening. This is something that's been an issue in the book business. And there's a wonderful book called Publishing and Bookselling by Frank Mumby that was written in, I believe, 1915. And Frank Mumby, it was a British book, did 5 editions. The last edition came out in the late 40s. And it's a history of bookselling that goes back to the Roman era. And it's full of incident. One doesn't think about bookselling in ancient Rome, but the Romans kidnapped scribes from all over the Mediterranean when they were expanding their empire, and they would ship scribes as slaves back to Rome. And they had these big buildings called scriptoria. And these enslaved scribes made copies of Roman books. And then these books were distributed out throughout the empire. Some Roman books, there were thousands of copies made. And it is only because of the activity of the scribes out of the scriptoria that we have Roman literature and ancient literature that's come down to us. There were so many copies. It's hard to believe this because, a few copies might have shown up in an Irish monastery somewhere, in the Renaissance, and sometimes they survived coming through Baghdad. But the interesting thing about it is that because so many copies were made, we know about what happened back then. It's important that books get disseminated and get distributed, and that there be a few copies that survive whatever era we're in. And those of us who are in the field of sharing literature around and actively pushing books into people's hands are in a long game. This is not just what happens right now. This is about human history and human culture. And my bookstore, this is my 7th bookstore. I've been opening bookstores and being forced out of business for many years. It's now 41 years since I got my first bookstore job. And I've lived in a number of different cities. I've run a variety of different bookstores. I've written books about book selling. And my bookstores go up and down with the waves. Just this past year, I have closed 2 bookstores. I had 3 bookstores in Easton. I've closed 2 of them. And I have learned not to mourn very much when I close a bookstore, because it's me. I'm the bookseller. I open a bookstore. I'm kind of like, when there's rain, the mushroom comes up. If there's an opportunity to open a bookstore, I'll do it. And if the conditions change, I'll close the bookstore. And then if another opportunity comes up, I'll open a bookstore. But what's significant is that I have professional skills. I know how to call a bookstore into existence. I know how to dissolve a bookstore, and I'm not alone. It's a kind of professional activity of which there are thousands of people in the United States and tens of thousands around the world who engage in this. Now, the strange thing, and one of the reasons that there's all this misunderstanding of the way that book selling works, is that there is no certification in the field of book selling. There is no formal curriculum. You can't get a degree in book selling. You can't become a master of book selling. There's no professors of book selling. There are no universities of book selling. And this is very strange, because there could be. It's actually surprising. Librarianship, for instance, involves certification. You actually can't get, you can't have professional advancement. You can get stuck in, lower tiers of librarianship unless you get an advanced degree. Book selling isn't like that. And the only place that you can get book selling education, well, of course, you get it on the job, but also you can learn by being a member of the American Booksellers Association. Now, the American Booksellers Association is a trade association. It's not a professional association. Okay, so it's not like the American Medical Association, for instance. It's a trade organization, and that means that book-selling businesses become members of it, and these businesses are competitors. So because it's a trade association, a trade organization, it has a trade show, and the vexed aspect that it is composed of competitors has resulted in a shifting attitude towards newcomers over the many decades. And that is an underlying aspect of the story of independent bookselling over the last 30 years. So I want to just explain something. When you decide to become a bookseller, I want to open a bookstore. And many people have harbored the desire or the fantasy, I would like to own a bookstore. I would like to open a bookstore at some point in their lives. It's a dream that is not uncommon for certain kinds of people, bookish people. What about I could open a bookstore? So then you think, well, all right, what would that even mean? How do you do it? And once you start looking around for how do you open a bookstore, you will discover the American Booksellers Association. And the American Booksellers Association has shifted over the years in its attitude to people who want to open a bookstore, because the American Booksellers Association is a trade organization that is composed of existing bookstores. And these bookstores are scared of competition. It is natural that I have a bookstore and I'm scared if somebody opens a bookstore right next to me, because this is a stable community. There aren't going to be twice as many customers. The person who opens right next to me might want to sell the same book as me. They might decide to sell it cheaper. A competitor can put me out of business. So what happens when somebody says, I want to open a bookstore, and they come to the American Booksellers Association? In my life, I have seen the American Booksellers Association as a group change its attitude multiple times to people who want to open a bookstore. And I believe that the story of the last 40 years of bookselling in this country can be interpreted through the lens of the attitude of the American Booksellers Association to new entrants. Why is this important? Because people get older And even if their bookstore is doing very well, they may decide that they can't run their bookstore anymore. It's too much work. You have to go to work every day, and you have a fine bookstore. Things are going well. Things are stable in your community, but you just age out of it. And this happens generation after generation after generation. The kids don't want to take over the family bookstore. Things, there's all the community is shifting. Your bookstore isn't doing as well as it used to be. People want to get out of the business. They fail to sell it, and they have to close their bookstore. And at that moment, a community is left without a bookstore, but maybe someone wants to start a bookstore in its place. And that's where the churn happens. There's constantly bookstores closing and bookstores opening. This year, 30 American Booksellers Association members have closed their bookstores, and 30 other people have opened independent bookstores. And that is very common. Some years, 100 bookstores close, and other places, 100 people start bookstores. So over the period that I've been in business, bookstores there have been a couple thousand bookstores in this country. It's gone up as much as 4,000 or 5,000 bookstores. It's gone down as few as 1,500 bookstores. At the moment, there's 2,500 bookstores. So bookstores seem to rise and fall with some kind of tide. And one of those tides is the attitude of the American Booksellers Association communicated to its membership: we are going to welcome new people to open their bookstores, or we are going to close ourselves off and not work with people who want to open bookstores. We're going to discourage people from opening bookstores. And that is a really interesting thing. And that this is a moment when there's so much bad news about bookselling that people who want to open a bookstore can decide, I'm not going to open a bookstore. It's too dangerous. And if you think about it right now, suppose that you had been thinking about opening a bookstore and you were watching the news right now, you would say, no. And your friends and relatives would say, no. And you don't dare to open a bookstore now. Don't ever open a bookstore. It's a terrible idea. Well, if that is the message that the society is sending out, then people will be scared off from opening a bookstore. And there will be more, every time a bookstore closes, there won't be a bookstore to replace it. But if the society says, we love bookstores, we would like to have more bookstores, all who wish to open a bookstore, please do try to open a bookstore. Maybe someone will help you. Maybe you'll get support. Then those people who are unsure will be encouraged and they will open bookstores. And that's what's happened this last 10 years. The American Booksellers Association came back from a period of being very cautious and started being very encouraging to people who were interested in opening a bookstore, who expressed an interest. There were lots of additional educational programs started by the American Booksellers Association. They developed an online service where talks at the annual conventions were recorded and posted on an education section of the American Booksellers Association website. And it is much, much easier. It became much, much easier to learn how to open a bookstore thanks to the efforts of existing bookstore owners who knew that they were encouraging people who might open a store next to theirs and might compete with them. This was a form of generosity which could be thought of as foolhardy. But the truth is that independent bookstores right now, the current cohort of about 2,500 independent bookstores, understand that it is better for all of us independent bookstores if there are more of us. We need more of us. And when there are more of us, then the message that we have can be more clearly understood by the general populace. And the naysaying that happens through the media, and which is also partly the Amazon.com PR campaign, that independent bookstores are doomed, your independent bookstore is going to go out of business, Amazon is going to be your only choice, so just forget about it, just buy with Amazon. That message can be overcome. So we have to, as independent booksellers, we have to communicate to people who buy books. We are like the farmer's market. That's a good example. We may be a bit more inconvenient, but we bring things to your community which you really need. And now I'm going to share a screen if I can do it. Let's see, one participant, multiple participants. Let's see here. Is it this one? Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. And here are some things that I want to make sure as a bookseller that I communicate to my customers, and that I think that people on this call probably already know a lot of these things about why do you need an independent bookstore. If the bookstores came back, people out for a stroll would have somewhere to stroll to. Entrepreneurs would experiment with risky and meaningful business models. 3, towns would have places that distinguish them from other towns. 4, teachers turned bookstore owners would share their love of reading, free of school restrictions. 5, self-improvement and self-education would take place in informal, non-judgmental settings. 6, real estate investors would have drivers of increased property values. 7, children who loved dinosaur books would personally examine some. 8, locals who owned bookstores would be neighbors joining the work of like-minded community builders. 9, book clubs would have places to hold meetings. 10, community members would act on their feelings about being captive to large corporations by choosing to patronize locally controlled enterprises. 11, retirees turned bookstore owners would share their love of reading with neighbors. 12, local writers would have places to present and sell their work. 13, book lovers would be able to choose that their interests not be cashed in on by information distribution conglomerates. 14, shy people would have places to be in public but still private. If the bookstores came back, 15, activists would dedicate their lives to ensuring neighbors could access information freely and engage in self-expression. And then if the bookstores came back, 16, books and reading would be visibly rooted in daily life. 17, community leaders would have focal points to pool efforts for social uplift. 18, curious people would have provocative environments to stimulate their search for novelty. 19, former librarians turned bookstore owners would promote books without fear of censorship. 20, we shall overcome would be a true prediction where freedom of creative communication was concerned in relation to corporate shaping of individual choice. 21, touring authors would have places to read aloud to fans and sign books for sale. 22, enthusiastic readers would have places to get jobs. 23, the potential success of grassroots collective action would have become real and hope would have conquered fear. So that's my little summation of what would happen if the bookstores came back. And we can open bookstores. And the interesting thing is that this particular emergency, which is causing bookstores to close, is also being perceived by plenty of people around this country as providing a future opportunity to open bookstores. Just a couple of weeks ago, a young woman from Northampton, Pennsylvania, contacted me and asked to come and talk to me because she wants to open a bookstore. And I said, okay. And she came over. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, and she has 2 young children. And she just said, well, there's no bookstore in Northampton, and I'm planning to open one. And she just wanted to talk to me for a little while to see if I had anything useful to say. And she didn't appear to be afraid of opening a bookstore at all. She said, you know, once there's a vaccine, and you know, that she was quite confident that it should be possible. And this is the thing, is that there are people who are planning to open a bookstore. They may have delayed their plan for a couple of months. They may be looking forward 2 years in the future. But people are going to continue opening bookstores, and bookstores will continue going out of business. at the same time that bookstores are opening. And all that we have to do is make sure that we do not buy into the negativity that sometimes is directed towards independent bookselling and independent bookstores by the public discourse. And it is tragic when any independent bookstore goes out of business, but sometimes it provides a gap where someone else decides, well, I could open a successful bookstore where that person failed. That person there's all sorts of reasons. That person shouldn't have gone out of business. I'm going to go into business. And so we can hope that that will happen every time that a bookstore goes out of business. So there's my presentation, book selling at the moment. And since this is the breakfast forum, I thought it might be fun to have a conversation. Steve?
Yes, thank you very much, Andy. That was, you've got my brain spinning. So I'll try to let others chime in too. The way that the question and comments and conversation section takes place is that you let me know you want to make a comment or ask a question. You can do that one of two ways. You can put it in the chat box, but which is probably better is to go to the participant menu at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, it shows a couple of people next to each other, and you click on the participants menu and you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand. Not raising your physical hand, but raising it on the screen so that I can see it. There's a couple of pages of people here. So if anybody has any comments or questions they'd like to make, please feel free to do so. You may unmute yourselves to ask your question. And to get us started, as I said, I've got a lot of things I want to say, but what really struck me at first is how you mentioned the corporate model driving what we read and what we're aware of, like on Amazon. I also work in publishing. I'm on the other side of the equation. I work as an editor for a university press, and I'm amazed at how many discussions we have that are based on the volume of books that will sell, and we essentially decide whether somebody's book is going to be published based on whether we think it's a viable topic, and not necessarily whether it's something that people should know about. Do you have any thoughts about that side of the equation? How both sides have this role to play?
Well, the university press used to be the bastion of mission-driven publishing, was nonprofit publishing. And the pressures on the university press as a whole region of publishing to become more commercial and to pay more attention to, is this thing going to sell and how many copies are we going to sell, have grown in the last couple of decades. And I think that it's probably the early 90s that you begin to see this really change inside of the world of university presses. I remember that it used to be a topic of debate, that, why is it that, but I think that basically colleges began to wonder, why are we subsidizing this, publishing these obscure things? We publish our professors and we publish the thesis of the graduate students, and we know we're not going to sell many of these things. And then the presses would defend themselves by saying exactly the sort of thing you were just saying, that this is important. This book must be published. And so the university presses had that role, and that has really been eroded, and it's largely related to the change in the whole economic positioning of universities and colleges in the last couple of decades. The pressure on colleges to compete with one another, and to, you could tie it to all kinds of things. Of course, there's the complaints about the high salaries of the administrators, and the way that faculty are, the difficulties of getting tenure, and the rise in the use of adjuncts, and the whole sort of shift in college business models. So I think that university presses have been forced to become more commercially concerned, and more concerned about each book has to have a successful P&L, just like commercial publishers. As far as what has happened as a result of this, the answer is the rise of self-publishing. Probably a decade ago, 2 decades ago, there were about 1 million books in print, listed as in print. There are now 17 million books in print. And what does in print even mean anymore? Because, you know, books, print on demand has created a paradigm where I can set up a book with an ISBN available to be printed in 2 days, and it can be shipped to somebody who buys it through a bookstore or on the internet. And that book is considered to be in print. So there's been a kind of pushback. There's the loss of the editor. There's the loss of the imprint of the university, the imprimatur of the university. There's the loss of the marketing campaign. But there's a rise in freedom to publish anything you want and make it accessible. So I think that one of the things that's happened is that the author has been kind of cut loose. It's complicated. It's obviously very complicated, and the publishing industry is attempting to adjust to the rise of self-publishing. But many authors who write a book that's significant, cannot get it published anymore. And it should have been the university press that did it. It used to be the university press that did it. And now the publisher has to kind of go out, the author has to go out on their own. But it's a return to the 19th century or to the 17th century. Milton got paid £5 for Paradise Lost, right? And, you know, Mark Twain had to self-publish Huckleberry Finn, and these, you know, Erasmus used to go to the printer and print a bunch of copies of his books and mail them to aristocrats all over Europe, requesting a donation. The current setup of publisher, editor, author is it's only been going for 100 years. So there's a lot of different ways to get ideas into the public discourse.
Fantastic. Yeah, as always, you've raised some very interesting points. And I don't want to dominate discussion, so does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? I see you got a comment in the chat from Kay saying, thanks, Andy. What books are you currently reading, and what do you like to read in bed?
Well, I'm currently reading a biography of Giordano Bruno. I think it's called Giordano Bruno, Philosopher, Heretic. And before that, I was reading The Expression of the Body, which is a book about the difference between ancient Greek medicine and ancient Chinese medicine and their relation to each other. So I tend to read academic stuff.
Fair enough. Those of us in academic publishing, thank you for doing that. Kathy, you've got your hand up. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah. Like you talked about the Strand, do some of these bookstores own their own buildings, or are they all on leases and rentals, which is hurting them?
Well, there are as many stories about occupancy as there are bookstores. So every bookstore is in a different situation. The Strand, the situation was that Fred Bass, the father of the current owner, bought that building in the mid-50s and was paying it off for decades, and they now own it. That bookstore was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass, so it's a third-generation bookstore. They own the building. They have been offered enormous amounts of money for that building. The building has grown so much in value that for that family, the Bass family, to continue to operate the Strand was an act of civic high-mindedness, and has been for decades. So they have really maintained a cultural anchor in that part of New York, and they didn't have to, and they don't have to. And if the Strand goes out of business, they'll sell that building for a lot of money, and it'll turn into, now it has just been landmarked just last year, but nevertheless, they'll still be able to sell it for a huge amount of money. So you shouldn't, I think that the reporting about the Strand has been very, very poor about what's going on this year. There's been a lot of focus on Nancy Wyden's relationship with the union. And basically, it's very cynical reporting. But that family has made a huge contribution to New York, and I don't know what's going to happen right now.
That's sad. I remember going to this, I think it was the Strand. No, maybe it was the Barnes and Noble place down in Lower Manhattan to get college textbooks back in the 60s, to get used textbooks. Yeah.
Well,
So
New York used to have, 4 times as many bookstores as it has right now. And it's terrible what happened in Manhattan. And that's a story, as you point out, it's a story of real estate. And if more bookstores had bought their buildings, it's possible there'd be more bookstores now, but that's not always the case. And for instance, in Brooklyn, in Cobble Hill, Book Court bought their building many years ago in the 70s. And about 5 years ago, the family decided the building had appreciated enormously. They were getting offers every week. And they decided to sell their building. They sold it for, the people who founded it in the 70s had grown older. The younger generation was not interested in taking it over. They retired. They sold the building for millions of dollars. There is no longer a bookstore there. But within a year, a former employee of that bookstore had opened a new bookstore in Cobble Hill, Books Are Magic.
Yeah, that's a great store.
Well, she was an employee of Book Court, and then she became a successful novelist. And she decided to open a bookstore after Book Court closed. And so it's worth considering, if God forbid the Strand decided to dissolve, there's hundreds of talented individuals who work at the Strand. There are millions of outstanding books that are in the Strand, and it's possible that those booksellers and those books would disperse, and the result would be a whole bunch of new bookstores in New York City.
Well, Books Are Magic is, of course, they have the advantage of being in Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn Heights area. So they have a very educated population. Every time I've been in there, it's really been crowded. And they do a lot of great programs and stuff.
Well, that is an independent bookstore that opened during a period when lots of people were saying that you should not open an independent bookstore.
I hope they continue.
That's fantastic news to hear that. We've got a couple of hands up and we've got a couple of questions in the comments or in the chat. So let's the ones in the chat came in first, so I'll ask those, and then we'll go to Karen and then Francis. So hang on just a second. I've got a couple of questions to ask. Fred wants to know, how do you decide on how many copies of a book to buy?
I try to pace myself. These days, it is very easy to replenish your stock. So I usually just buy 1 or 2 copies when I buy a book. But it depends on where I'm getting it from and how difficult it would be to replenish it. And in the exact situation, for instance, I bought 10 copies of the book Hopes High, a COVID-19 anthology, which is a 64-page self-published book created by a friend of mine in San Francisco, and as the editor, and 16 children from around the country who wrote poems and stories and graphic novel about their experience as kids during the pandemic. So I have a stack of this book in my store right now, and I'm probably the only bookstore in the country that is selling Hopes High. It's a wonderful book. We have 3 25-minute long programs during the Easton Book Festival of the children reading their stories. Now you might say, well, that's a very odd book to point to as far as how many, to answer this question. If it's a book that's published by Penguin Random House, then I'll just buy 1 copy or 2 copies because I can get another copy in 2 days. It's very easy to replenish these things. But with this blurb book, what I want is for people to buy it and donate it to the Easton Public Schools. So it depends on what use I have. As a bookseller, I am a very active player in my community. And so I think about, well, what am I trying to do by buying this book? What's my purpose? So that will determine how many copies. And also, what's the pipeline? With Hopes High, it took Blurb 10 days to actually print the damn thing and then mail it to me. So it's harder to replenish. But when the moment comes, I want to have enough copies to make sure that I can satisfy that very brief time. Somebody comes in and says, I love that film. I want to buy 10 copies to give out to my child's class. And I'll say, oh, I happen to have 10 copies right here. So that moment, I've got to be ready for that moment with that particular book.
Thank you. And Cecilia says, what is your book buyer process? How do you decide which books to have in stock?
Well, there's some books that I'm always going to want to have in stock. I always want to have a copy of Goodnight Moon. I'm about half of my store is a children's bookstore. I always want to have a copy of Are You My Mother, or something I know that's going to sell very steadily. I will always maintain copies of that. For books that I know I'm going to need to hand sell, if I love a book, then I'll keep a copy in stock. But as far as what new books, then that depends on what store I'm running. Remember, I've run 7 different bookstores now, and what time of year it is, and what is the sales opportunity. If I have an author that's going to participate in a program with me, that's one thing. If a book is getting incredible buzz, that's another thing. So every book has its own considerations.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we have 3 hands up, and we'll go in this order. Karen, you were first, and then Francis, and then Victor. So Karen, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes, I've known Andy and Rebecca ever since they moved to Easton, and started going to their store because they have these wonderful children puppet theaters, very creative, and many, many good books for children. Today I would like to hawk this book written by Andy, which is rather autobiographical. I see it on his shelf to the upper left-hand corner. No, the other side.
There we go.
This was a fascinating read.
Thank you, Karen.
I like the way it ended, but I'm not going to tell you how it ended because you're going to have to read it for yourself. I got such an insight into Andy's life and what drives him. It's a fascinating read. And then I bought this other book, which is down to his left shoulder, Son of a Rebel Bookseller. Okay, and I'm about halfway through that. And then his partner in crime is Rebecca Migdolf. And she is a fascinating, I don't know how her mind works.
Hey, Rebecca.
Can she step inside for a minute? She does political cartoon, not cartooning, what do I want to say?
Comic journalism.
Yes, comic journalism. I don't understand how her mind works, but it is awesome. And in the same vein, I bought this book that she did. This book that she did. And here, for example, on the back is sort of a notion of the cartooning, the political cartooning that she does. So I haven't read this one yet. And it's, in some parts of it, it's X-rated, but that just adds to the fun of reading her book and trying to understand who she is as a person.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Where is she? She didn't come into the room.
Yeah, she'll be back in a second.
Okay. So I can't, and I was strolling, like he said, I was strolling through downtown Easton. The store is right next door to the Crayola factory, same side of the street, around the circle there downtown. And it was a beautiful day, and was strolling with a friend, and the rest is history. I bought all those books. And he has a Easton Book Festival, which is online, and it's over now, but he sponsored the Easton Book Festival, which was live, was it 1 or 2 years ago, Andy?
So we have an Easton Book Festival going on right now for a whole month. You're holding up a bookmark from last year. So last year we did it for just 3 days, and we had 200 events in 3 days all around the center of Easton. This year we're running it for a month, and we're running 75 events over the course of a month. So it's all online, and it's much easier to access now. And we're not doing anything simultaneous, just one at a time. Rebecca, Karen was just holding up your books.
Oh, thank you, Karen.
Hi,
One
Rebecca.
nice thing about having a bookstore is that you can sell your own books. I always tell people that my bookstore is the #1 sales venue for this book. So you can always find my book at my bookstore. And Rebecca also writes books, so we have a number of books between us.
And they're both puppeteers too.
Well, Rebecca's the puppeteer. I'm the musician.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes.
But we run hundreds of free programs every year for children and adults, and they're puppet shows and story hours, and we have them online and we have them in person. Thank you, Karen. Karen has been a huge supporter of ours.
If you haven't familiarized yourself with Book and Puppet yet, you really should get over to Easton and do so. It's a wonderful place, and Kay and I have always felt it was a great place to be. Okay, Frances, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have some benign statements. A while ago, when we were tourists in Turkey, in the old ruins, they had a humongous building. It was falling apart. It was old. And it was a scriptorium, and I had never heard that. I only heard that monks transcribed them, blah, 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 and that's how books generated. I had no idea that there was this humongous building that people just transcribed books. And then, though I didn't realize some people were slaves to write books, as you just, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Then the other point I wanted to make is, in Vermont, there's a wonderful there are local little bookstores. One is in Waitsfield, that's on the Route 100 corridor. And I swear to God, that was a fire hazard. I mean, there were books all over at the end, all over the place, but wonderful. And the owner knew so much, he could give you advice. And in Middlebury, we were starting a little group involved in some grassroots political type stuff. So somebody started reading George Lakey, and then it buzzed around, oh, Lakey, and oh, let's get together. Then that generated into the local bookstore in Middlebury, where, oh, let's all we'll have the bookstore order White Fragility. And then an author came, and the bookstore offered that environment. It was cramped, but it was cozy enough to be comfortable and interact enough. So the local bookstore had significant value. The college had its own campus, its own bookstore. Middlebury had its own bookstore. But the little community, I mean, Burlington, hour away or so, there's a Barnes and Noble there, but it was the warmth of the bookstores. And they had another book discussion in Bristol. It was the local bookstore, and it was crowded. People went, people were interested. Let me have that bookstore order the book for me. And so I guess anecdotes is all I'm offering.
That's
Thank
beautiful. You. Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, Frances. Kay and I went to Stowe, Vermont with our daughter a few years ago. And the first thing we noticed is there's an independent bookstore. And of course we had to stop in. So whenever we go anywhere, if we see an independent bookstore, it automatically becomes part of the travel agenda. Okay, Victor, you've got your hand up.
Oh, right. So I've been a bookseller since 1980, and I did it in connection with my publishing. And I have an office at the Truckster Town. But I do want to point out that Amazon, and I've gone to most of the events at Javits Center, where they have it every other year. So I see kind of been looking at the publishing industry. And I think it must be said that Amazon is really a bad actor. I think there should be some unity about antitrust violations. I'm also a member of the National Writers Union. So there's some issues there, but I won't go into that. I do want to give a shout out to C-SPAN 2, especially. My favorite channel. And you can go and Google authors and you can listen to their presentations. For example, you can get a 3-hour presentation by Chomsky on In Debt. depth. And so there's a lot going on, and maybe you can give me some feedback on Amazon and how they're hurting the industry and how we can do something about that. Topic for longer discussion, but great presentation. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Victor. Amazon. Well, so I'll tell you something humorous. So as I mentioned, I've been driving around the area every week. I get in the car and I drive special orders and I bring them out to people's houses. And this summer, of course, there was a lanternfly infestation in our area, and we had lanternflies all over the place. And the lanternfly is kind of a sort of grayish, oversized bug with, when it opens its wings, it has the sort of translucent red. So we were seeing those all over the place. Well, when you drive around, if you just drive around and around the area with no like narrow destination, making deliveries and dropping off and just going to neighborhoods you've never been to, something that really struck me, all the Amazon vans. It's an oversized sort of gray van, and they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere, and they've got and on the back of the Amazon van they have these red tail lights. And one day this summer, as I was driving around, just made a book delivery, and there comes an Amazon van around me, and then I'm driving around, and I'm the local book dealer trying to sell books, and oh, there's another Amazon van. I thought, these Amazon vans, they're just like the lanternflies.
Yeah.
It's an invasive species.
Andy has a music video for his book Rebel Bookseller when the second edition came out called Amazilla versus Barnes.
Oh, I can show it.
Which was animated by myself and our assistant manager Neri Capitani, who got her MFA in animation, and this was what she used as her example project. And the music was all done by a group of us doing performance art music, and I created the artwork. And Andy's about to show it, I think, by sharing his screen.
I believe I can do this.
It.
Yeah, let's.
You need to go full.
Okay, let's stop there.
Yes, say again what the title is.
Amazilla versus Barnes Kong.
Okay, let's see if I can.
Are you sharing your screen now?
I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. Let's see here. Go here. Okay, we don't have much time for this, but it's only 2 minutes long.
You'll be fine. 2 minutes.
Okay, it's this one.
Yeah, and then you can go into full screen.
Okay, and then we have to
go into full screen.
Okay.
First.
That's the CEO of Barnes & Noble. There goes your university press.
Who's that? Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we actually have another comment in the chat section. So while we're
There's Jeff Bezos's rocket. Oh my gosh.
Oh, we had so much fun with that. It took forever.
Wow.
It took forever to make.
Isn't that
though.
crazy? It took a year to make that little film.
Oh my gosh.
There we go. We got lots of classes that are starting to come back, and we are thankful for that. I think the most mature group on that list is the pace setters, and we are thankful
go
for
away!
you guys
Go away!
showing up today.
What's
Glad
happening?
you're
That's stop it!
one thing I do want to point
Stop
out
it.
we've got coming up, and that is
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, we got an
money matters.
We got an automatic follow on to the Amazon versus Barnes Con there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the comment that we have here, someone asked about the directions to your bookstore, and that has been answered. So, Judy, if you were wanting to find out where the location is, it's in the chat section.
Well, yeah, we have to put it in again.
Somebody else put it in there. Kate
okay.
put it in.
Oh.
And Kathy asks, I recalled a few years ago that there was a news report about people in the Middle East Xeroxing books which weren't available to make sure that people could read them. Do you have anything to comment about that?
That's fascinating. Sounds like samizdat. So sort of, is that because of censorship? I'm not familiar with that story, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was it was about censorship and books that weren't available in the Middle East. I can't remember which country it was, but people were making a big effort to Xerox all these books to sell them, to make sure that people could get them.
Books have always been controversial, and people have always gotten in trouble for publishing books that the rulers didn't like. So it's an interesting world to be part of. When if you read Andy's book Rebel Bookseller, which I read the first edition of when we met, and I was up all night reading it, and obviously it must have been good because I married him. And but he talks in the newer edition. He talks a lot about the tours that we took when we were promoting World War III Illustrated to different independent bookstores, little anarchist bookstores all over the country. And it's such an interesting world because people have bookstores and they're volunteering there, and it's not about making money. It's about the free exchange of information without censorship and criticizing, the narrative. And so it's just so interesting too, because now we have QAnon, and we have, people believing all kinds of crazy things. And, the mistrust of government is so great. And I think that people should, have bookstores where they can go and get the information. And we've been running an anti-racism book sale in front of our store for months now on Saturdays. And I think people notice it and they appreciate it, and some are disgusted and walk away. But we have taken a position relative to the community that's our own position about what we believe, but we're backing it up with a whole bookstore full of books. So it's meaningful, and you can't do that if you're the public library, and so there's something special about independent bookstores.
Right, you're not beholden to an oversight board, and if you have an independent bookstore, you can advocate the political ideas that you have. So it is 10 o'clock now. So
we have a puppet show to do.
We actually have to do a puppet show online.
Let's all thank Andy and Rebecca for their time this morning and for sharing with us. And please, if you are not familiar with their bookstore, acquaint yourselves with it and support your local bookseller. So thank you, Andy and Rebecca, very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Good. Take care. Let's see here. I can.